Okay, so think about this. You're facing a challenge, right? Maybe at work, maybe even at home, and you get that feeling, that urge to just armor up,
Hmm.
put on that tough face, act like you've got it all sorted out, or, just completely sidestep that really awkward, messy conversation that needs to happen.
Oh, yeah. That feeling is so familiar. It feels like the smart move, like protection.
Exactly, like you're putting up a shield. But what if that shield, that armor, isn't actually making you stronger? What if it's the thing holding you back from, like, real connection, real impact, real courage?
It's such a key question
Yeah.
because that instinct, to protect ourselves, to look strong, totally unflappable, it's so ingrained in us. But the research, the actual data tells a pretty surprising story about where real strength comes from, especially when we talk about leadership.
And that's exactly it, isn't it? That fascinating, kind of counterintuitive idea is what we're digging into today. We are doing a deep dive into a really influential book, Dare to Lead, Brave Work, Tough Conversations, Whole Hearts by the amazing Brené Brown.
Yeah, she's, for anyone who doesn't know, a research professor, #1 New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
Just brilliant. Known for all that work on vulnerability, shame, empathy, courage.
Her work really pushes back on a lot of the traditional stuff we've been taught about what strength looks like. Whether you're in a boardroom or a classroom or honestly, even just dealing with yourself.
Absolutely, it challenges so much.
Right. So think of this deep dive as like your shortcut. We're going to focus on the core problem the book tackles, unpack its biggest ideas and lessons, and really importantly, look at how you can take these insights and start using them like right away in your own life, your work, wherever you are.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with the why. Part 1, the problem. Why does this book hit home for so many people? What's the basic issue Brené Brown's research brings to light in, companies and leadership today?
Well, at its core, the problem really is that widespread avoidance of vulnerability we just talked about.
Hmm.
That sort of cultural script that tells us showing up like fully with our flaws, our uncertainties, that's weakness.
Right, that constant pressure to seem like you're totally in control, you know everything, you're always composed.
Exactly. And when we operate from that place, that fear around vulnerability, it leads to some really specific and honestly often really dysfunctional behaviors in workplaces, in other systems too. The research shows a whole bunch of issues that stem directly from this. We dodge the tough conversations. We avoid giving real, honest feedback. Accountability just kind of breaks down.
Yeah, it's hard to hold someone accountable, or even yourself, really, if you can't just have the straight conversation about what's not working, right?
Precisely. And it also creates these environments where shame can really fester, where people get stuck after a failure instead of learning from it, and where we actively just opt out of really necessary but difficult discussions.
Like about diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, exactly. Things like diversity, equity, inclusion.
Hmm.
Because the fear of saying the wrong thing or making a mistake and looking bad just feels too risky, too exposing.
So we choose feeling safe or comfortable instead of being courageous and stepping into that necessary discomfort. That really lands. So how does this, show up day to day? What are the signs?
Oh, you see it everywhere. Passive aggression. That's basically communication trying to sidestep courage. You see it in gossip, back channeling. The book calls it the meeting after the meeting, which is perfect.
Ah, yes, where the real stuff only gets said after everyone leaves the official meeting room.
Exactly. Because they didn't feel safe enough to say it in the room. And you definitely see it in the dirty yes.
Oh, the dirty yes. Saying yes to someone's face, but inside you're screaming no, or you tell everyone else later it's a terrible idea. That creates so much confusion.
And kills trust. It just poisons clarity. And the overall cost of all this armoring up, it's huge. Lack of clarity, eroding trust between people, trust in the system itself, and just way lower engagement. People can't bring their best selves, their creativity, their problem-solving skills if they don't feel safe enough to be real, ask questions, or admit they don't know something.
It makes me think of that great story Brené Brown tells in the book, that really vulnerable moment she shares about starting somewhere new and hearing people talk about C-level executives.
Oh, the SEA level story.
Yeah, she admits her first thought was SEA level, like salt of the earth.
It's such a brilliant, relatable moment she shares. She thought it meant, like salt of the earth people. Because she was new, she felt unsure, and she didn't just ask, hey, what does C-level mean? It wasn't some exec being high and mighty. It was her own fear of looking like she didn't know, Getting in the way of just asking a basic question. It perfectly shows how easy it is, even for her, someone who studies this stuff, to armor up and make assumptions instead of just being vulnerable enough to ask for clarity. and how that happens everywhere, at every level.
Right, assuming that asking makes you look dumb or like you don't belong. Okay, so the problem is clear. Armor, avoiding vulnerability, leads to dysfunction. Let's get to the solutions. Part 2. What does Dare to Lead teach us? What are the big ideas, the key lessons for building braver cultures and becoming a daring leader?
Okay, the absolute bedrock, the foundation of everything in this book is vulnerability. But Brené Brown gives it a really specific definition from her research. Vulnerability is the emotion we feel during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure.
Uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure. Okay, but to most people, that still sounds like weakness. It feels uncomfortable.
Oh, it absolutely feels uncomfortable. And that's the whole point, the crucial shift her work makes. This book completely reframes vulnerability. She argues, and the data backs her up, that vulnerability is not weakness. In fact, she says it's the most accurate measure of courage we have. To be courageous, you actually have to be willing to step into uncertainty, take emotional risks, let yourself be seen.
So, like asking for help when you're stuck, that takes vulnerability, so it's courageous.
Yes.
Admitting you messed up. Vulnerable, therefore courageous. Trying something new where you might totally fail. Vulnerable. Courageous.
Exactly. Those aren't weak moments. They're moments that demand courage. She also makes a really important distinction, one that comes up a lot when people first hear about this, especially maybe in more technical fields. She differentiates relational vulnerability. That's the emotional exposure piece, the stuff needed for connection, and leading from systemic vulnerability, which is bad.
Systemic vulnerability. Like bad processes.
Yeah, think leaky systems, weak ethical controls, shoddy engineering, that kind of thing. Not the human emotional part.
Is that where the story about the rocket scientists comes in?
Yes, perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about working with these groups, including rocket scientists, and when she brought up vulnerability, their immediate thought was, like, engineering failure, stuff literally falling from the sky. They equated vulnerability with incompetence, disaster. But then she pushed them. She asked, what's the hardest, bravest part of your actual job? And they talked about things like having to raise ethical concerns, speaking up when something feels wrong, especially if you're standing alone against a group.
Ah.
And she pointed out that challenging the norm, speaking truth to power, risking disagreement that takes immense relational vulnerability, stepping into uncertainty and emotional exposure for the sake of doing the right thing.
Wow, yeah, that story really clarifies it. Emotional courage, not structural weakness. Okay, so if vulnerability is the foundation, what are the skills, like the how-to of leading bravely with your whole heart?
So the book lays out 4 key skill sets or pillars for daring leadership, and they all rest on that willingness to be vulnerable. The first one is rumbling with vulnerability.
Rumbling.
Yeah, rumbling. It's the core practice. It's not about getting rid of vulnerability or making discomfort go away. It's about learning to engage with it, with the difficulty, the uncertainty, leaning in instead of backing away. And practicing this builds what she calls grounded confidence.
Rumbling. I like that. It sounds active, like getting in there and grappling with the tough stuff, not running.
That's exactly. Engaging with the mess. Okay, second pillar, living into values. This is about getting really clear on your 1 or 2 core values, the fundamental beliefs that truly guide you. And the book really emphasizes that integrity here isn't just, saying you have values. It's about choosing courage over comfort consistently and practicing that one set of values everywhere, work, home, online, offline. She shares a really personal story about her own value of faith and how hard it is to live that when people on her side, politically or whatever, use dehumanizing language.
That's powerful. It shows living values isn't just a nice idea, it's a constant choice, often a really uncomfortable one, that demands courage, especially when it clashes with feeling comfortable or fitting in.
It absolutely is. It requires rumbling, you see. Okay, third pillar, braving trust. Trust isn't built in big, grand gestures. It's built slowly, iteratively, through small, consistent acts that often involve vulnerability. The book gives us the B.R.A.V.I.N.G acronym. It's a really helpful framework to understand the parts of trust. Boundaries, respecting yours and others. Reliability, doing what you say you'll do. Accountability, owning your mistakes, making amends. Vault, keeping confidences, not gossiping. Integrity, choosing courage over comfort, practicing your values. Non-judgment, being able to ask for help or fall apart without being judged. And generosity, assuming positive intent in others.
Braving trust, that makes something so abstract feel really concrete and actionable.
It really does. Breaks it right down. And she uses that lovely marble jar metaphor from her daughter Ellen's teacher, actually.
Oh, right.
Every time someone shows up reliably, or respects a boundary, or offers non-judgment. It's like putting a marble in the jar. Small things build trust over time, like remembering parents' names at school pickup, she says, or just scooting over on a bench to make space. Little marbles. These are small acts of vulnerability and connection. And really importantly, the book stresses that self-trust is where it all starts. You need to be able to apply braving to yourself.
That self-trust part feels huge and often overlooked. Like, can you rely on yourself? Are you accountable to yourself? Do you judge yourself harshly?
Exactly. It has to start inward. Okay, the fourth pillar, learning to rise. This is all about resilience. But the key idea here is you have to build that resilience before you fall flat on your face in the arena, before the setback hits.
Right, not trying to learn how to land after you've already jumped out of the plane.
Precisely. It's about building the skills proactively.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we build that muscle for getting back up?
A real game-changer tool she introduces is this simple phrase, the story I'm telling myself. When something goes wrong, a setback, a conflict, a disappointment, when we're, face down in the arena, our brains instantly create a story to make sense of it. And often, these first stories are full of fear and shame. She calls them shitty first drafts, or SFDs.
Ah, the shitty first draft. That's such a perfect, relatable name for that immediate, usually negative story we spin.
Right. It gives it a name, takes away some of its power. The tool is simply to name that story. To acknowledge, okay, the story I'm telling myself right now is that I'm a failure because that project tanked. Or the story I'm telling myself is that person is totally ignoring me on purpose.
Yeah.
Just stating the SFD, even just to yourself, helps you pause, reality check it, and shift from just reacting based on emotion and assumption to looking at facts and asking questions.
Get curious about the story instead of just believing it.
Exactly. The book also mentions how we often try to avoid feeling difficult emotions when we're down. We might use emotional offloading strategies, like chandeliering. Ever seen that? A tiny trigger sends someone hitting the roof.
Oh, yeah. Big reaction, small cause.
That's chandeliering. Or getting high-centered, like a car stuck on a ridge, unable to move forward or back because we're kind of paralyzed by an emotion we don't want to feel.
And learning to handle those reactions, that connects back to practicing calm, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The book calls practicing calm a leadership superpower. It's about managing your own emotional reactivity, learning not to just fly off the handle or completely shut down when things get stressful, but to stay present, stay grounded.
Okay, so those are the four main pillars. What else is key in this model?
Well, woven through all this are some related concepts crucial for brief work. Understanding shame and empathy is huge. Shame, she defines as that intensely painful feeling that we're flawed and therefore unworthy of love or belonging. It's universal, everyone feels it, and it's incredibly corrosive. Perfectionism is often just a heavy shield we carry, hoping if we look perfect, we can avoid feeling shame.
And empathy is the way out of shame.
It's the antidote. Empathy fuels connection. And it's about feeling with people, not feeling sorry for them, that's sympathy, but truly trying to step into their shoes, see the world through their eyes, and connect with their feelings. Some key empathy skills she mentions are practicing non-judgment, because we tend to judge others where we feel most vulnerable. Developing emotional literacy, actually knowing what feelings are and having words for them is vital. And just practicing mindfulness, really paying attention. The book gives examples of empathy misses, 2 things not to do, like that gasp of horror when someone shares something vulnerable or trying to one-up their struggle. Those things shut connection down.
So it's really about listening, trying to understand, and holding back judgment, especially when it feels uncomfortable.
Exactly. The book also touches briefly on other armors we wear, like numbing, using things like food, work, booze, busyness, whatever, just to avoid feeling difficult emotions. She sometimes calls these shadow comforts. Or the armor of being a knower or being right. That comes from the vulnerability of admitting you don't know or that you made a mistake.
Ugh, that pressure to always have the answer be the smartest one. That's exhausting armor.
It really is. And it totally shuts down learning and curiosity, which is another key piece. The book positions curiosity as an act of vulnerability and courage, precisely because it means stepping into uncertainty, admitting you don't have it all figured out. Research links curiosity to learning, problem-solving, innovation. But it can feel risky, almost deviant, in cultures that prize being right over learning, because curiosity inherently questions the way things are.
Asking why or what if when everyone else is just going along takes guts.
It does. And feedback, too, giving and receiving it, is reframed as fundamentally vulnerable acts. The book offers practical tips, like a checklist for giving feedback, that includes sitting next to the person, putting the problem in front of both of you, acknowledging strengths, and modeling vulnerability yourself. And for receiving it, the key is staying grounded in your values, being brave enough to listen, even if it's hard, and looking for something valuable here, even if the delivery isn't perfect.
Yeah, shifting from, let me tell you what's wrong with you, to, hey, here's an issue we need to look at together. That feels completely different.
Totally changes the dynamic. Less shame, more problem solving. Then there's power. Shifting away from power over dominance, control towards power with collaboration, power to helping others find their agency, and power within, recognizing everyone's potential. And finally, recognition, the importance of actually celebrating wins, even small ones. It builds joy, resilience, engagement, all vital for daring cultures.
Wow, okay, that is a lot. Rumbling, values, braving trust, rising, shame and empathy, curiosity, feedback, power, recognition. It all comes back to that core idea. Vulnerability is courage. It's a total rewrite of what strong leadership and maybe just strong living looks like.
It really is. It's about building that courage muscle so you can finally take off the armor and show up, not just for yourself, but for everyone you interact with.
Okay, so that leads us perfectly into part 3, application and takeaways. How do we actually start doing this? What can someone listening right now do to put these powerful ideas into action?
Well, the most important first step, honestly, is self-reflection. You have
Oh,
to dare to lead yourself before you can lead others. So start by asking, what's my armor? What are my go-to behaviors when I feel vulnerable? Perfectionism, numbing, being the knower. Just get curious about your own patterns.
identifying your armor. Yeah, that definitely takes some self-awareness. And vulnerability right there.
It does. And just as vital, get clear on your core values. What are those one or two non-negotiable beliefs that guide you? Really take the time to name them. Maybe even write them down so they're visible.
Okay, self-reflection. Know your armor, know your values. What's a practical next step?
Start using the tools, even in really small ways. That phrase, the story I'm telling myself, it's incredibly powerful, not just for you personally, but in conversations. Instead of reacting instantly when someone says or does something that pushes your buttons, try pausing and saying, maybe just to yourself first, okay, the story I'm telling myself right now is X. It creates space for inquiry, maybe even checking it out with the other person, instead of just launching into an assumption or accusation. The book mentions Melinda Gates using this with Bill, talking about feeling ignored by experts. By naming her SFD, her own insecurity, she could then ask for what she needed. It cuts down on all those made-up stories and conspiracy theories that fill the void when communication isn't safe or clear.
Using that phrase really shifts it from assuming, someone's intent to just trying to understand reality. That seems massive for trust and avoiding simple misunderstandings.
It's a total communication game changer. Another huge application piece is operationalizing your values. It's not enough just to name them. You have to figure out what are the specific behaviors that actually support this value, and then you have to practice those behaviors consistently, even and especially when it's hard. The book talks about desirable difficulty, like practicing drills in sports. It's uncomfortable, but it builds the skill. Same thing here. Practicing value-aligned behaviors, especially the uncomfortable ones, builds your courage muscle.
Can you give an example? Operationalizing a value.
Sure. Let's say a core value for you is inclusion.
Mm.
Okay. Operationalizing that isn't just putting a slogan on the wall. It means specific actions. Like maybe it's consciously making space for quieter voices in meetings, or ensuring your communications are accessible. Or maybe it's having the courage to call someone in, not call them out, but call them in when they say something exclusionary. That takes rumbling with discomfort. It means actively listening to understand perspectives different from your own, which requires the vulnerability to admit you don't know everything. When a tough conversation about inclusion comes up, you don't armor up and hide. You lean in, grounded in that value, even though it's messy. It means practicing those tough skills, listening, empathy, brave communication.
Got it. So identify the actions that bring the value to life and then deliberately practice those actions, especially the ones that feel like a stretch.
Exactly. And that brings it all back home. The core message of Dare to Lead, the biggest takeaway for you listening, is that daring leadership, brave cultures, wholehearted living, they don't happen by avoiding discomfort. They happen by cultivating the courage to lean into vulnerability. It means practicing these skills, rumbling, living values, braving trust, learning to rise, empathy, curiosity, feedback, even when, maybe especially when, it feels hard. Because that discomfort zone, that's where the growth happens. That's where real strength, trust, and connection are forged.
It really sounds like a continuous practice, doesn't it? A journey, not somewhere you just arrive.
Absolutely. It's daily work, daily choices, daily practice.
Now, as you're processing all this, maybe some questions are popping up for you. Like you might be thinking, okay, this sounds great, but how do I use this if I'm not, the boss? Does this only work if I have a fancy title?
Or maybe, how on earth do I try to build trust and encourage vulnerability in my team or even my family when, like, nobody else seems open to it? What if I feel like I'm the only one trying to take my armor off? That's a tough one.
And a really common question is definitely, where's the line? How do I know if I'm being appropriately vulnerable versus just oversharing or making other people feel awkward?
Yeah, the vulnerability versus TMI boundary.
Yeah.
And maybe most practically, okay, given all this,
Hmm.
what are just one or two small, concrete things I can actually do this week to start? These are all really good, really important questions. They get into the tricky nuances, the real-world messiness of trying to live this stuff.
Mm.
And the book itself does offer more depth and tools for navigating many of these specific challenges.
Right. So to kind of wrap this up, our deep dive into Dare to Lead really underscores this powerful idea. True leadership, and really a truly fulfilling life, isn't found by hiding behind armor. It's found in the courage it takes to be vulnerable. It's a call to rumble with the uncomfortable stuff, to live by our values even when it's hard, to build trust marble by marble, and to learn how to back up when we inevitably fall down.
It really drives home that quote she uses often, right? The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. The courage, the connection, the trust. It's all waiting on the other side of that vulnerability we're so tempted to avoid.
Exactly. So if this conversation lit a fire under you, if you want to really get these tools and figure out how to apply them more deeply in your world, we definitely encourage you to check out the full book, Dare to Lead. It's packed with more stories, research, and practical guidance.
It really is a fantastic resource for anyone wanting to show up with more courage, build stronger relationships, and foster more connection, really, in any part of their life.
So as you head out from this deep dive, here's something to chew on. Based on everything we talked about today, what's maybe just one piece of armor you might be willing to challenge, even just a little bit? Or what's one brave conversation you might be willing to lean into this week?